hold that open in front of you, because to make sense of the story at all, you just need to look back at the top of chapter 15. Because you notice in the reading, verse 11, it says Jesus continued. So obviously he's continuing some kind of dialogue, or at least a monologue. So jump back with me to the beginning of the chapter. And it starts like this. You see the little heading, the parable of the lost sheep. Now the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus, but the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So the context of this story, let me help you just in case here. Look at verse 2, the Pharisees and teachers of the law. It was effectively a totalitarian state, this nation, under the rule of religious people, the Pharisees, the teachers of the historical law of the nation. And you pretty much fitted in the society according to how well you adhered to their standards and their definition of religion. So if you were in with this crowd and up to their mark, you were okay. But look how they contrast to the opening line. The tax collectors and sinners gather round to hear Jesus, and it makes the religious leaders furious. This man welcomes sinners and eats with them. Let me give you some context on this. A tax collector would have been a collaborator. It was an occupied state. The Romans were the major empire of the day. They occupied this part of the world. And the tax collector would make his money by knowing his village or town, knowing who was wealthy and who wasn't, and the range, doing a deal with the Romans that he'd get the taxes and he'd take a cut of the profit. So you would be absolutely despicable in your own country. Now catch the words again. The tax collectors all gathered round Jesus, and the leaders of the country are disgusted. And why shouldn't they be? Why should this guy be allowed to talk to such filthy people? The sinners mentioned would be people who were so morally unacceptable in the culture. They would have done things or been part of activities which would have meant they were so far outside the ethically acceptable norm, that they should be washed away. So here we have a story which we've read a bit later on, where we get the feel that these were the people who hung out with this man Jesus. Now, I don't know what that makes you think immediately, because, of course, it depends partly on where you've grown up in the world, because that skews the perspective we take. We wear those glasses. In my growing up in Wales, Christianity was the respectable thing to do. The church was called chapel, as it would be in many schools. You would go to chapel. It was normative. It was the 60s and 70s. That's how life worked. And the respectable people were part of that setup. And those who didn't go simply weren't quite of a high enough standard. It's a long time ago, that culture, but it was pretty normative. So it's quite a shock to me in my 20s to find out that whenever you read this book, and please take it away, it's one of the 4 accounts of the life of Jesus, this man is such a radical. I mean, he's so countercultural to anything I knew or presupposed about what it was to have a relationship with God. The people who were actually attracted to him were the people who other people found abhorrent. And if you get your head down just once more, you see that there are 2 parables before ours. The parable of the lost sheep. Look at verse 4. Suppose if one has 100 sheep and loses one, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country until he finds the lost sheep? It's a straightforward story. Shepherd loses sheep, goes to find the lost one. The parable of the lost coin is a woman, simple story, loses money. She really needs the money, and she's on her knees until she finds it. When she finds it, she's chuffed. She's thrilled. As we come into the story we look at in some detail now, here's basically the context. People were saying, this Jesus is an absolute disgrace, the people he hangs out with, filthy people. And Jesus tells 2 stories in response. They're 2 stories of finding. And basically he's saying this. I have come to find people. Like the shepherd who says, I've lost a sheep, the 99 are okay. I've got to go anywhere I can to find the lost one. The woman who desperately needs to get the money and wants that money, she'll do anything to find it. Here's straightforwardly the metaphor. God says through Jesus Christ, I am coming to find people. I'm absolutely committed to finding people. I need to go after people. I cannot stay in heaven. I cannot chill out and watch the world go by. I need to go and find people who need help. And so our story tonight is actually the third story in that series, the parable of the lost son. But in the first two series, it's somebody going to find. And in our story tonight, it's somebody who's been found. Saying, me? You've come for me? You can't come for me. Because if you think the collaborator, or if you think the social outcasts were bad, let's have a look at this guy. And now we'll dive into his story, but can I say right at the start that my job is just to tell you what the story's about. But that'll be words and tone of voice, I guess. This story is about saying, look up, all is not lost. A new start is possible for anyone. Don't confuse being in a church building and in a mission-type events week where Christians are trying to tell. Don't confuse that with the fact that you've got to be a religious type to meet Christ. This message for anybody, however miles away you are from what you'd consider religious. Here's the most radical thing in the world that's happened for 2,000 years. Anyone can start again at any moment with Jesus Christ, regardless of your past, regardless of your starting point this evening. I know that sounds heavy. I understand that it's Friday night. And I hazard a guess that it sounds a little bit patronizing. I understand that too, I think. But do your best to work with me on this talk, because a speaker and an audience work together. The downside tonight, unless you shout out, which you might, is that you don't get the feedback that you'd get at Forum, where you get that shorter talk and lots of discussion. But all I'm doing is laying down the ground for those kind of discussions to some extent. That's what I'm trying to do here. So do your best to come with me on this talk, and I'll spend most of my time saying, look down. So two advantages. You really don't have to look at me, which is pleasant. And you can see that what I'm talking about is there, and it's not my idea. So shall we crack into the story? Let's have a look here at verse 11. Jesus continued, there was a man who had 2 sons. The younger one said to his father, Father, give me my share of the estate. So he divided his property between them. Now this was appalling behavior. I mean, you'd understand it now. He's saying to his dad, I wish you were dead, because if you were dead, I could have the inheritance. Can't you die? No, of course, it's appalling. Even as I say it now, we smile because it's so ridiculous. But in this culture, where there was far more respect for elders, far more authority vested in your elders, it wouldn't just have been within your family, it would have been a disaster. It would, in the village and the community that they lived in, it would have been awful, absolutely despicable. But in the story, you see, the father says, well, I'll divide the property. This man is a disgrace. That's the context it would have been read in originally. Let's see what happens to him. Not long after that, the youngest son got together all he had, set off for a distant country, and there squandered his wealth in wild living. I assume I don't really need to try and describe what that would be. You can sort of paint the picture for yourself and join the dots and ink it in. He just had a bit of a riot because he had a few quid in his pocket and he was going to have a right good night out for as long as it could last. So off he goes and he has a bit of a riot. And verse 14, he spent everything, and there's a famine in the country. There's an economic crash. There's all kinds of problems in the economy, and he's lost it all. He began to be in need. So, verse 15, he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. Not a great job for a Jewish boy. feeding pigs for slaughter. Do you see? Because Jews don't eat pork. You're meant to get that it is absolutely, he's gone from being loaded up on his dad's wealth and having a total jolly with anyone who'd hang out with him, to losing it all so badly that he has to feed pigs for slaughter, and he's reduced to wanting to eat their food. So you've got the picture. It's a condensed story. You can imagine the master storyteller, Jesus, telling it brilliantly and beautifully, but remembering all the time that he has his eye on the audience of verses 1 and 2. His eye is on those people who think they're better than everybody, who think they're good enough for God, who assume because they're part of the religious establishment, the cultural establishment that is the religious one, that they are surely good enough for God, and people like the tax collectors and sinners could never get near God in a million years. So his eye is right on those people as he tells this story. Oh, he's a genius. Let's read on in the story. When he came to his senses, the boy, he said, verse 17, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare? And here I am, starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." Now, you've heard the end of the story. His dad says, "Hey, come on, come home, let's have a party." So you know the end. And it's a lovely story. And we could draw this story into a close and say, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that a lovely moral? Isn't that the way we should treat people when they let us down? Isn't it marvelous to be welcoming to somebody when life fails? And it's a lovely story, taken on that surface level. But if you and I were to dare to look at the details of the rest of this story, it could become a revolution in a person's life. Let's be granular. Let's look at actually what Jesus is saying as he draws out his meaning in this story, not just a nice ethic. Look with me at verse 17. He came to his senses. He's looked in the mirror, or the equivalent of his mirror, in his pigsty house, with a pod ready to pop into his mouth if he can bear to eat the equivalent of the dog food. And he said to himself, "What are you doing? For goodness sake, how did you end up here? I mean, you got it all. You had a great home. Your dad owns loads. He's the kind of dad whose heart you've now broken. All your pals have disappeared. You're on your own in your room. There's no one here. And all that runs through your mind is all the nonsense, all the stuff you've just been up to this week, all the things that your conscience was aching about when you were doing them, in the very moment that you were doing them, when everybody was saying, 'Come on, it'll be a laugh.' And your heart was going, 'Don't do it, don't do it.' But you say, 'Well, everybody's doing it. Oh, come on, it's such fun. I'm in.' But now he's in bed, in his pigsty, thinking, 'How did I get here? I'm better than this. I am better than this. Surely my life is more than how I've been behaving. Surely there's more to my being than acting on instinct and impulse when I've had a few beers. Surely I've got a bit more class than that.' Well, it doesn't look like it as I look in this mirror and starve. And there's nobody who understands me, because everybody's gone. Is there anyone tonight who's never lay there? I was going to say not in a pigsty, but obviously it depends what your room's like. But just lay there and everyone's gone and you think, "Oh, come come on. There is more than this. I am worth more than this. I mean, nobody'd know. Nobody'd know. Because, of course, we present ourselves well when he walks out of the pigsty in the morning. No doubt he scrubbed up and got on with his work and carried himself with a bit of dignity. But I know. Here's the great news for this guy. He comes to his senses. He looks squarely and firmly in the mirror and he says, get a grip on yourself now. Wise up. What is your life for? What's it about? Verse 17, I'm starving to death here. I've tried everything. I've come to the end of my tether. I've run out of resources. I've got nothing left to draw on. These are the aches, aren't they, of the human soul, all alone in the pigsty. I've tried everything. I've tried not to. I keep going back to it. I don't want to be like that, but it doesn't take long to get me there. Surely I could do better than the things that keep drawing me into failure. But I've tried so often, I'm at the end of my resources. I just get so anxious, you see. I just get so frightened, and I just feel I need release from it all. It just gets so tough sometimes that I've just got to escape, and it kills me afterwards. But Jesus says, until a woman or a man actually realizes, and now listen to the people he's talking to in the story, the self-contained, self-sufficient, high-achieving religious leader who says, God's lucky to have me, I'm doing a favor for him. Jesus says to people like that, please come to your senses, shake yourself out of your securities, please understand that you are running out of resources. And you've got to get to the point where you see it, or you cannot understand Jesus. You see, the tax collectors and the sinners, they got it. Because society ostracized them. But it's so hard for those of us who have plenty going for us to see that Christ is not about my own capacity to achieve things, but my need of him. And that without him, however sufficient I am, I cannot be in a relationship with God. And that's where this talk becomes horizontal. The New Testament always speaks directly at us through the stories. It can offend, it can annoy, it can attract, it can be puking sick, or it can be beautifully winsome, as you hear these stories in the New Testament. Verses 18 and 19, he's come to his senses, he's out of resources, and he says in verse 18, have a look at it, I'm going to set out and go back to my father. And I'm going to say to him, Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Give me a job. Make me like one of your servants, not your employees, like a servant. He's on his way. He's going, right, I'm going home. And as I go home, he must be saying the speech all the time. I'm going to say, Dad, I'm so sorry. Just any job, any job. You've got loads of jobs. Give me a servant job. Just give me somewhere to sleep, something to eat. I'll do anything. I think you love me, and I know I've embarrassed you. Please. Please. I'll try my best. Verse 20. So he got up and went to his father. Oh. See, if Christianity is something that's brand new to you, culturally it's never been on the radar, then Forum will be great because you'll get to ask a million questions that you haven't had a chance to ask yet. You've got a friend who's a Christian perhaps who's brought you. You've chatted to a college guest. You keep asking, right? For those who have an understanding of this message, those words are big words. I knew the Christian message from being in my teens, probably mid-teens. And I came to talks through university, perhaps a little bit in the upper sixth through university. And I can picture it now. I said at the beginning, if you're coming for the first time tonight, please hear me correctly on this. You're adults. I think I'm an adult, but you're adults. There's no scope for manipulation or twisting or tweaking. I'm just trying to tell you the story. You take responsibility for your own listening and acting. So take this story in this context. It's a personal story. I can remember going to talks like this and thinking, do you know what? I'm going to follow Christ. And then afterwards thinking, going for a few beers with the boys afterwards, I'm going to meet my mates in town, say. And going, I remember one night saying, do you know what? Honestly, if I hadn't come for a beer now, I think I'd be one of those Christian people. Just got out in time. You know, I'd had that banter so many times through uni. But I can remember the equivalent of going like this. Yes, no. It's funny, I didn't know if you'd laugh, and some of you will be cross, but promise me I'm not manipulating you because you're grown up, right? But have anyone had this feeling? Yeah. Yeah. No. See, the thing is, if I become a Christian, see what will I say, and will I keep it up, and will I be able to keep going? But I think this boy says, I'm off. I'm going home. I'm going to Dad. I'm on my way. And I can promise you now, if anyone gets near that tonight or in the next few weeks, or indeed any time in your life, it's an unbelievable power struggle. It is terrifying. You think it's just religion. You get close to coming to Christ and the magnet pulls and his love draws you in and you're fighting for your lives. Which way will I go? It is remarkable. And if you're in that fight right now, see those words. He acted. He moved. He went. He did it. And it was the toughest thing in his life this far. It was easy to take the money and run. It was hard to go to his dad, who he hoped would love him if he came back. That's why we left these cards. Forgive me if you've heard me say this on other nights, but just have a look at them for a moment. Please circle, it says at the top, agree balderdash. B can be any B you choose. I've put balderdash to be polite. Considering, decided. As you're listening to the talk, it may help you to be interactive with the whole thing. If you're looking at that and saying, where do I stand? I've read some out on other nights. I won't tonight. Because there were lots of them last night, and quite a few balderdashes, but no other B's, just balderdash, ever so polite still. I'll just tell you one, actually, I've got it here, but I don't need to look at it. Somebody put balderdash, and then there were some rude comments with balderdash, on them. But somebody put balderdash, and there was nothing written down until the last line, because it was printed up in a spreadsheet for me. And it said, Llanfair Pwll Gwyngyll, go Gerry, Llandrobwll, Llandysilio, go goch, which is the name of the longest Welsh town. So much as you wounded me in writing balderdash, you very much impressed me by not only knowing the name of the longest Welsh town, but actually spelling it meticulously. You got one letter wrong, so come and see me later and I'll sort you out. And we know you are because we know your accent. But that card's there for you to make comments. There have been some good, helpful and strong comments. And of course you can sign up for forum there, but you'd need to put details so that people can get in touch with you if you want to. Let's move to the last part of the story. While he was still a long way off, verse 24, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. But the father said to his servants, Quick, bring the best robe and put it on him. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. So they began to celebrate. Just look at that second half of verse 20. While he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion for him, ran to his son. At that moment, we know the end of the story. And we're not told this, so it is a guess, so it may be totally wrong. But I wonder how that boy feels as he's walking up the long drive to his father's house, when he has utterly robbed his dad of all dignity by saying, "Give me your money, I'm off." And he comes back in rags, and he's practiced his speech all the way home. "Just give me any old job, anything will do." And then, and in this culture, the head male of a society would never lift up his skirts, as it were, and run. Not in a million years. It lacked all dignity to do so culturally. And this chap flies down the drive, clothes up, knees moving fast, legging it at his son. I just wonder if the boy thought, "I'm going to get such a kick up the backside here." No, isn't it? Isn't it, though? Isn't it? Because he wouldn't have seen a dad run like that before. And he had robbed his father of all respect. And he deserved that smack up the bottom. "On your bike, son, back to the pigsty." But look what happens. He throws his arm around him and kissed him. Filthy, smelly boy. Isn't it? But look what the boy says to him. He's rehearsed this speech, you know. It's like doing a talk in front of a group, isn't it? You're sort of anxious and you go over the speech, and he's probably gone over this speech 100 times. "Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." But notice which bit of his speech he forgets, verse 19. "I'm no longer worthy to be called your son." He forgets to say, "Make me like one of your hired servants." Because he knows from the way his dad does that he's not going to be getting a job as a hired servant. No chance. Because he felt the love. That's a nice phrase, isn't it? Felt the love. Isn't that nice? Felt it like. I know you mustn't be too emotional in talks, I understand that. But he felt love. "I'll try harder," he says. You see, I'm not worthy to be called your son. Now remember, Jesus has got in mind people who are slaughtering him for hanging out with people who aren't worthy to be right with God. That's his audience here. And Jesus is saying to the self-righteous, the people who think they're doing God a favor by tipping their hat to him, Jesus says to these people, now get it really directly as we come to the end of the story. Jesus is telling the story. He says, "But the father," 22, "said to his servants, 'Quick, get the best robe and put it on him. Get him in the shower, get rid of the smell, put the best clothes on him. I want this boy clean. Clean him up. Get the old stuff off, put the new stuff on, put the best stuff on him.'" At the heart of the Christian faith, if you read Luke's gospel tonight, if you take it away and read it, you'll find this. Jesus is God become a man. Jesus takes on all our presuppositions about religion. He wants to take on all self-sufficiency in relation to God. This is the bit that is never popular, but without this diagnosis, you cannot understand Jesus Christ. We are the prodigal son. We are the lost son. When we read a story like this, have you done it like I do it? You step back and you read it objectively. You watch on the story. Or we might be the dad because we're loving. The last person intuitively we'll identify with is the boy. Unless somebody's coming after you and saying, can you taste anything of the boy in you? Have you experienced anything of the boy in you who lies there and says, what have I done? I've got to come to my senses. I've got to move. I've got to do something. There's more than this. I'm better than this. There's got to be a better hope. There must be a new start possible. I don't want to stay here. I'm going back. If you've a hint of that in you, You're tasting what people have tasted for 2,000 years when they begin to understand who God is in Jesus Christ and what he's come to do. He hasn't come to look after smug, self-satisfied, middle-class, religious people. He really hasn't. He's come for people who know that they need a new relationship with God. And they've tried all this life has to offer, and it cannot deliver, marvelous as it is to really go at life and career, all good, inherently good things to go for. But without Christ, and he's come for you and said, do you get this? That's why he speaks to these people in this way, and that's why he speaks like that today. And when he dies on a cross, as you come to the end of Luke's story, this very Jesus, he dies there. And here's the picture, that all the accumulated dirt that makes me unclean before my Creator who is perfect, all my rebellion against my Heavenly Father, all the times I said, I'll have my life, thank you, it's mine, give it to me, I'll run it myself. All the times we've woken up and said, what am I doing? What on earth am I doing with what I've been given? This is crazy. On that cross, he died to make us clean. The one who was never dirty in his soul, the one who never rebelled against his Father, he took our place on a cross. It's the scandal of Christianity. It is the scandal of the cross, as Paul calls it. It means that there's nothing we can do at all to earn the right to have a relationship with God. God had to do it all, every single part. And if we come to him, he says, you're clean, because I made you clean by dying to take the punishment that we deserve. It is an astonishing claim. If you're going to make up a religion, you would never make up a religion like this. You'd say, count up your merits, count up your debits, do the maths, account it. Did you come out in credit? Come to heaven. It's the way we think about religion. Jesus says, you have no merits to bring. I'll bring them all. I'll make you clean by dying for you. Can I put my arms around you? Can I wrap my arms around you? I'd love you to know me better. I'd love to grab hold of you. I know, it sounds funny, doesn't it? But And look what he says then. Put a ring on his finger and sandals on his feet. Now, don't read that and think you must wear white socks and sandals if you're a Christian. They don't have to go together, right? I do, but that's because I think it's cool. That's how it goes, you know. I'm Welsh, and that's how it works with us. The dad says, this is my boy. This is the signet ring. This is the crest of my family. I know this boy's been a rascal. I know he hasn't done what I wanted. I know he's turned his back on me. But you know what, world? He's my boy. I want him home, and I love him, and I'm proud of him. And I'm with him all the way, and I don't care who knows, because I love this child of mine. I know they're emotive words. I understand that. But to have a relationship with Christ is emotive. I had to make a little DVD before we started this week. And in it, I said my hope was that throughout our week and into Forum over the next few weeks, we'd see that Christianity is logic on fire. Reasonable? Yes. Something capable of clarity of thought and debate? Yes. A hypothesis that makes sense of life? Yes. Can hold its own against any? Yes. But logic that makes sense to the heart, that warms the heart, that gives existential meaning to existence. And the two are not mutually exclusive, but entirely compatible. That was our hope for this week of talks and for the next 5 weeks. A new life through the death of Christ to make me clean before my Creator. And a new power that my Father in heaven owns me and says she's mine. And I love her so much. And I'm committed to her welfare from this day forever and for all of eternity. And I'm going to stick with her whatever happens. Because it's nothing to do with your own merit. It's all his merit and his gift. This son of mine was dead and is alive again. Verse 24. That will either liberate you or offend you. Isn't it? You want life, you have to trust in Christ. That's some claim he's making. C.S. Lewis, the great writer, said he was either mad for saying things like this, crazy, or really bad, because that is awful. Or he was God. Was he mad? Well, he's written the greatest sermon, the Sermon on the Mount, that's ever been read. Gandhi, while he's alive, said the finest piece of writing on ethics history has known is Jesus teaching in the Sermon on the Mount. Was he bad? The things that have been done in 2,000 years that have brought massive benefits through his people have made an enormous dent in the cultures all over the world. Is he God? That's his claim. So they had a great party. Look at 24 as it ends. They had a marvelous party. Christianity is meant to represent an intellectually credible thing. And it's meant to represent existential purpose and meaning and hope. Summarized by a party. Your pals, you, joy. Great times. I mean, can the chapel Christianity we once experienced really be like this? Do you have to turn into a raving extrovert to be a Christian? No, you remain you. The lovely God of the universe has made us loud or quiet, somewhere in the range. No, you remain yourself, but you know Christ. And it's the deep joy of knowing love. Well, in conclusion, a friend of mine wrote these words in summary of the Christian faith. We are more wicked than we could ever imagine, yet more loved than we could ever dream. That is the heart of understanding Jesus Christ. The understanding that we're much worse than we thought we were. You know, we're not a rapist or a mass murderer, a child molester. There's degrees of evil. Of course there are. Of course there are. But when you lie in that pigsty and think, is this me? Is this really me? Am I better than that? It's the realization that says, I'm better than this. And yet, if you come to that point and think, God could never touch me with a barge pole, if this is true of me, then you have to get the second clause. You're more loved than you could ever dream of, which is why Jesus came. So, do you agree with this? Well, it's the last talk of this week before Forum starts next week. Well, might I say in the last chance I get in 3 talks to say, if you agree with this, I hope your heart bursts with joy. I mean, unless you're an extrovert, you won't be jumping around, of course, but somewhere inside you're saying, yes, it's true. My friend, it's true, and I will crack on for another term here at Cambridge. If you're saying, my friend, that is the most balderdash I've ever heard in my very long existence thus far, you muppet, press on until you bottom this out. Go on, I dare you. Take your Christian friend on. Go to Forum. Take Gobbett on. Go on, have a go. He's much cleverer than me. He'll be able to answer everything you ask. I sort of joke, but I think that's right. Go at it, if you would. Considering? Good. That's good, isn't it? You know, it's right that we should make time and think. And balderdash and considering can, of course, go together. But be careful. Forgive me for saying this, but be careful of the sort of, yeah, no. There does come a point where you have to say no or yes. Because the only reason we look into things is to find out what's at the other end. So will you come to your senses if you know you should? Then if you know you should, then you should decide now that you've run away long enough and that you must come to Christ tonight. Now, I won't do anything. We're grown people. I'm speaking to you as adults. But really think about it, if I may say it as aggressively as that. Because there is hope for everyone. There is a fresh start for all. That's what this story is about. Anyone can start again, whatever your background, whatever you've done, whatever your religious starting point or none. Anyone who is willing can have a relationship with Christ because he died out of love for us to give us a new start. That is the heart of Christianity. And I'd like to draw your attention for the third and last time to your little book called 2 Ways to Live. And if you flip inside the back cover, one page in, there's a prayer there which I'll simply read out. And it's the sort of thing that you might say in your own words if you were going to decide to trust in Christ as your Saviour. I'll just read it. It gives you a feel of the words, and I hope it makes a bit more sense of what's been going on this evening. Dear God, it says, talk to God at the top of the page. Dear God, I know that I am not worthy to be accepted by you. I don't deserve your gift of eternal life. I'm guilty of rebelling against you and ignoring you. I need your forgiveness. Thank you for sending your Son to die for me that I may be forgiven. Thank you that he rose from the dead to give me new life. Please forgive me and change me that I may live with Jesus as my ruler. Amen. That's a summary of the kind of thing that you might want to say to God if you're ready, if you know you've come to your senses to the end of your tether and you must come back to your Father through Jesus Christ. Chris, come and tell us what's happening just now. Good, I'll wait for you.